Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Seaman Hannah Farley. Today marks the 75th anniversary of the Allied landings along the Normandy coastline known as D-Day. D-Day and the Battle of Normandy marked the first step in the Allied liberation of Europe from Nazi occupation, involving the largest armada of ships ever assembled and more than 10,000 supporting aircraft. D-Day was the culmination of years of planning and preparation. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill described it as much the greatest thing we have ever attempted. Australians played a small but important role as part of the Allied forces that participated in D-Day. Approximately 3,200 Australians participated in the D-Day landings on the 6th of June. Thousands more would serve during the Normandy campaign and beyond. Some 500 members of the Royal Australian Navy served on attachments with the Royal Navy. A small number of Australian soldiers served on the ground with the British Army. Our nation's main contribution came in the air, where approximately 1,000 Australian airmen flew with the Royal Australian Air Force squadrons, and a further 1,800 operated on attachment to the Royal Air Force. 10,000 Australians waited in training and reserve pools, ready to join operational squadrons as casualties mounted. 13 Australians were killed on the 6th of June while participating in Operation Overlord, and hundreds more were killed over the course of the campaign, flying in support of the ground forces. June 1944 was the worst month in the history of the Royal Australian Air Force in terms of total casualties. In tribute to them and all Australians who served throughout the war, the Australian War Memorial recognises and remembers their contributions to one of the most momentous events of the 20th century. We will soon hear the story of one of those men, Flight Sergeant Malcolm Robert Burgess, a Lancaster tail gunner who was killed when his aircraft was shot down while supporting the Allied landings in Normandy. We are honoured to acknowledge the Honourable Anthony Kevin Royston Prince and the accompanying delegation who are in attendance this evening. We warmly welcome Mr. Peter McQuibbin of Palantir Technologies. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of the following schools. From New South Wales, Earlwood Public School and Gravesend Public School, and from Queensland, Fig Tree Pocket State School. If able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Golden soil and wealth for toil.
Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Warrant Officer Gordon Jeffrey Stokes. Gordon Stokes was born on the 18th July 1922 to Albert and Lillian May Stokes of Paris, Ontario, Canada. The Stokes family immigrated to Australia in the 1920s and settled in the Sydney suburb of Bexley. Stokes attended the local high school. At the age of 17, began to work as a junior clerk. He later went on to work as a radio cadet and valve technician for Philips Radio in Camperdown. Just prior to the outbreak of the Second World War, Stokes joined the 1st Battalion of the Citizens Military Force and became qualified as a machine gunner. When the war began, Stokes was still too young for full-time service, but he had set his mind on joining the Royal Australian Air Force. On the 20th of July 1941, he went to the RAF's recruiting office in Sydney and he enlisted. He was accepted to train as an aircrew, and after his initial training, he remustered as a trainee pilot. In early September, he was sent to Temora. Here he learned to fly the Tiger Moth. His trainers must have seen a natural affinity for flying, as he was sent on to train as a fighter pilot at Wagga Wagga and Uranquinty. After nearly a year of training, Stokes was awarded his flying badge on the 16th of September 1942. He was promoted to sergeant the following day. Stokes embarked from Sydney with other members of the RAF on the 17th of October on a transport ship bound for England. Upon reaching England, Stokes was posted to an operational training unit where he learned to fly the fearsome Hawker Typhoon fighter. On the 17th of March, Stokes was promoted to temporary flight sergeant. He was promoted to warrant officer a year later. While in England, Stokes met and began a relationship with Joan Aspinall, changing his records to make her his next of kin. He also bought a motorcycle to help him get around the English countryside when he had any time off. On the 10th of December 1943, Stokes joined the number 198 Squadron of the Royal Air Force. From the time he joined the squadron, he was actively involved in fighter sweeps over occupied Europe and flying escort missions for British and American bomber formations. In February 1944, number 198 Squadron's Typhoon fighters were equipped to carry rockets and became a ground attack squadron. Stokes and his comrades were actively involved in attacking German targets in France in the lead up to the Normandy landings known as D-Day. D-Day saw number 198 Squadron supporting the British landing on the Normandy coast, ranging inland to attack German troop and vehicle formations. On the 7th of June, 198 Squadron was tasked to perform an armed reconnaissance in the Lisieux area, looking for enemy transport and armoured vehicles. The squadron was split into 3 sections of 4 aircraft, and each section was identified by the colours blue, green and black. Stokes was flying in green section as Green 4. Once over the Norman coast, the pilots of green section located an enemy tank near Cormay and proceeded to attack. The pilot of Green 3 noticed tracers coming at his aircraft from a German machine gun positioned near the tank. Stokes' aircraft followed last in line, and as he pulled up out of his attack dive, several other pilots noticed a small flame under the starboard wing, which they attributed to machine gun fire. Stokes' aircraft was seen climbing to 1,200 feet, where it entered a cloud formation. During the climb, the formation leader noticed what he believed to be the canopy of the fighter falling away from the aircraft. Seconds later, the Typhoon dove out of the clouds, plunged nose first into the ground, and burst into flames. None of the other pilots saw a parachute to signify that Stokes had bailed out. Stokes was initially posted as missing in action, and it was not until May 1945 that his parents' agonising wait came to an end. A German unit in the area recovered Stokes' remains after removing all identifying objects, buried him as an unknown British airman. In the churchyard cemetery in the town of Lemoutillier-Aubert, children playing near the crash site discovered a watch and lighter engraved with Stokes' details. These were handed to members of the local French resistance, who gave them to the mayor. When a British Graves registration unit reached the town, the mayor passed on Stokes' watch and cigarette lighter to them. His remains were located and exhumed, and after being positively identified, were re-entered into the Lumu-Tie U Het Bear Churchyard Cemetery, where they remain today. He was 21 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, amongst 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Warrant Officer Gordon Jeffrey Stokes, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.